Hot Water History, episode 112. Another Thursday night back to back. Gary, what's going on?
I'm thinking about the dedication that we have for to our audience to produce an episode every week, especially as the riveting State of the Union address is happening right at this moment.
I'm getting a lot of FOMO right now, but it is pretty remarkable, 52 weeks in a year times two. We're well above 2 years now of
Yeah,
not missing a week. And,
that's dedication, Charlie.
and we've had travel, we've had life stuff.
Uh-huh.
Some of us are doing new businesses and we just keep pumping them out. So,
That's it. That's it.
and shout out to everyone who's listening and who taps in every week. So
And Charlie got a new microphone. I hope you can
yeah,
hear the
that's
difference.
good. About time.
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous, Gary. I think
Yes.
it's
Why?
good. This is off topic. We didn't talk about this beforehand.
Um,
My wish is that it would be a South Side summer, as in South Side of Chicago.
mhm.
I just think that I just got this feeling outside of Mass on Sunday that there's gonna be a lot of beautiful St. Mary's days. White Sox, no expectations with the White Sox. They're gonna be 40 games below 500. It's a
Yeah.
sit.
Well, there's expectations. They're very low expectations.
It's a sit anywhere summer at the
Yeah,
games,
that's true. The food's
which
not going to be any worse. So,
that's what I'm saying. I'm sure a Miller Lite will taste the same
yeah.
at the game.
Oh, that's a good point. I kind of relish the days. I mean, back when I was well, kind of like your age, and they were so bad and inconsequential that you could just walk in anytime and spend $5 and go to the lower bowl. You spend like $4 on an upper deck seat and no one was checking, so you just went and sat wherever you wanted in the lower
It's
bowl.
it's a sit anywhere summer.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some South Loop nights, maybe some Bridgeport patio
Crazy
sunsets.
nights for Charlie.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying. I thought it was a South Side summer.
Mm.
Chinatown, maybe an impromptu trip to Chinatown, right?
It's right down the street from you.
I'm hungry for dumplings.
Hmm.
But now I think it's going to be a psyop summer. I think they're getting something big ready.
Oh,
I
you
don't
mean
know
with the
what I don't know what yet.
with the Democratic National Convention coming and everything? That's going
Just
to be that's West Loop, so
I'm
I'm sure
just
it's gonna be.
we're looking at election years, and I'm still not over 2020 yet. And
Uh-huh.
the fact that we're doing a rematch 4 years later, I got a
Sure.
I got
Rematch.
I got a big feeling that it's a psyop summer. Unfortunately, which stinks because I was looking forward to my South Side summer. It still might be a South Side summer, but I have a feeling that there's only going to be few that survive.
Hopefully it's not a Southside summer like in '68 during the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah, that's not what I meant by
Oh. So you don't think that's part of the PSYOPs prize?
I don't know. I do
Huh.
think that there's some racial stuff brewing just with all the stuff with the social media platforms.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, some of the stuff that's on that I mean that's just getting popped up on my feed is just like blatant, you know. It feels like blatant mind control in
Ah,
the other
okay.
direction, I guess you would call
Oh,
it.
I see. Hmm. Interesting. Well, what do you want to explain
I think
mind
I get a
control?
ton of like anti-black, not only jokes, which some of them I find funny, but also just like I don't know how else to describe besides like actual racism. Like
Ah,
not the stuff
like
that, the
so
like
the pushback coming in the form of the toad starts appearing and then uh you get your racist joke and
like
do you think
I
the
got a
psyop is
lot.
turning levity into like actual animus, or what do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah. And
Okay.
like I don't know how else to I don't know the best way to describe it, but I've just the way that I don't follow anyone on Twitter, right? But the stuff that I get that
Hmm.
pops up because when I go on my feed for whatever reason,
Well, when you
Elon's
have
got,
the swastika in your
yeah, I know.
uh,
That's what I was saying. Elon got it set up so that it it's gone a little beyond like Dave Smith type Tom Woods, Michael Malice type people.
Okay.
You know, it's I think that there's and then you see the comments below. I think there's some major radicalization going on
Okay.
right now
Oh,
on the
okay.
social media.
Yeah. Well, speaking of an institution that has traditionally been extremely and actually racist, it's the traditional labor union within the United States, as well as the modern labor union.
Yeah, so this is something you wanted to talk about to get to the crux of the episode.
Well, to be
You get
fair, you said I want a history of labor unions,
That's
at
true.
which point I balked because having taken labor union history and just labor
Is
history in
that like an
general,
actual
oh, that's an actual subcategory that people get PhDs in. Uh, Thaddeus Russell, in his early career at Columbia, was a labor historian. They're all over universities, and they're almost univocally Marxists. So, but yeah, the history of labor unions. So we could go back and do a whole little history about how they emerged from medieval guilds out of necessity, of the supply of labor being depleted after the um bubonic plague or something like that. I think it's snorers. It's so boring. Or we could go into American history, and I can remember not fondly taking an African American history class, and the a lot of a bulk of the turn of the century focus was on A. Philip Randolph and the sleeping porter cars union. It's just like, oh, it's pretty uh well, sleep inducing. So rather than look at a history of it, I want to see, or more so talk about and address how they function and use Ludwig von Mises' take on labor unions to maybe shed some light on the whole operation, as it were.
Sure. I get all of that and I can see how it could be boring, but don't you think it's a little important to set some, historical context, which you kind of just did there about
Hmm.
like why they exist and their justification for existing in the first place?
Yeah, well, the early justification from the medieval period was simply to, well, enhance a trade, particularly in a locality. So this is what Mises calls a limited space operation. So there would be, given the resources and indeed human capital and expertise of a certain town or region, think Bordeaux with wine, or Liège with lace, or think of another area of Europe that would be fragrant scents with Cologne, Germany, or the Champagne region with sparkling wine. So you had these niche areas or of cheese makers or lace makers, and because or for example brewers in, let's say, Saxony or something along those lines. And because there were both the resources, whether they be agricultural or material or what have you, uh, and as well as the expertise within a certain field, there was a consideration of how could the workers and contributors maintain a high standard of both for both the laborers and the product, and ensure that, for example, in the case of a place like Cologne or Frankfurt or something like that, that all of the brewers or manufacturers of a certain item within the towns, as they operated within guilds and cooperated together, even if there were individual businesses and corporations of sorts, that they met the standard of both training of the worker and then the to keep the reputation of the town up, the standard of the product had to meet certain goals and attain those goals. So there was also consideration about, limiting the amount of people who could get into the trade. And that was, to be sure, a, a practice by which the guilds themselves were worried about too many people infiltrating the industry, whether it be bakers, candlestick makers, furniture manufacturers, whatever it was. And so, and they were, as you might say, and an entrepreneur at times might be more so a monopolist, but an entrepreneur might be worried about the actual supply. So making sure or attempting to, through limited central planning, regulate how much output was taking place for the product so as to maintain some level, some price levels. Now, this a rebellion against natural and competitive prices? To a degree, it is. Although Mises is going to argue in a truly free market, insofar as and in so long as the coercive power of the state isn't added to corrupt such cooperative enterprises like guilds or unions, then unions are are relatively okay. In fact, the market will determine whether the union is doing things that are conducive to the benefit of and the advancement of the well-being of both producers and consumers within the marketplace. Um, so that'd be the market. However, when government and its coercive power starts putting its heavy claw on the scales, that's when it becomes corruptive, and that's when the unions transform, as Mises argues in Human Action, into monopolistic practices. And I love this quote that he has, if I could share it with you now, um, about distinguishing between a entrepreneur and someone who's a monopolist. Okay. And see if and I think this is a beautiful quote because it helps us distinguish the cases in which a union could be beneficial to both producers and consumers, laborers, capital on the other side, and then also those who partake in or purchase the good or service that they're providing. Uh, but they can also be corrupted toward the monopolistic side. So here's what he says. The entrepreneur profits to the extent that he has succeeded in serving the consumers better than other people have done. So it's truly cooperative, but it's also competitive. The monopolist reaps monopoly gains through impairing the satisfaction of consumers. And so this is where he's leery of saying that unions are always monopolistic and that their controlling of labor output is or tends toward monopoly and a restrictive policy. He makes a distinction, and he's careful to in his chapter on prices to make a distinction between restrictive policy that entrepreneurs can at times engage in so as to ensure maximum uh, profit to sate a market's demand, and what unions do. Okay. So if a union, for example, sees that there's a lessening of demand, then maybe the union, which has the uh, goodwill authority, not the coercive power authority, but the goodwill authority, might not take on more apprentices to become steel workers if the demand for steel falls. Do you see that? That's not antagonistic toward the market. That's not antagonistic toward the consumer.
So Mises isn't against he's not against unions, but he's saying that when the government gets involved in it, the
It's
government
corruptive.
ruins it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's not per se against unions as unions, right? However, when unions form Soviet style, coercive type alliances with government and they become exclusionary, so exclusionary, so as to, for the singular purpose of artificially raising wage rates above the competitive rate, that's when it works out to the disadvantage. It's highly disadvantageous and deleterious to the consumer. And as such, it's corruptive of laissez-faire and free exchange.
Yeah.
And more so, he says too, it's so exclusionary to other workers who are not a part of the union, who aren't in the union, because they can't, therefore, because unions, once government gets involved, become extraordinarily antagonistic toward non-union members. They lock them out of both the capacity to produce in that field whether it be again barrel makers as coopers or shoemakers as you name it, as cobblers or whatever you want to, whatever you're producing. But also it's injurious to the consumer who could have benefited from both the labor and the human capital, the skills, perhaps the innovation that could have been afforded to the industry by those who are artificially again and coercively excluded from that field. So I
So
have some
what happens if a demand for, just call it like electricians, goes up,
yes, yes.
and
Mm.
let's say a union, uh, basically a union can still control whether they're bringing in more people because they need to control, they get to control the wages through that.
Sure. In a truly free market, if a union was operating in a, let's say, the most optimal market functionality of it, would have a means by which to assess the demand, right? For example, if the union was working in a cooperative fashion with, as you said, what was it, steel that you mentioned?
Electricians.
Electricians, yes, in electrical field, that all of a sudden firms are calling the union and demanding that more workers come. Well, that would be an incentive of the union who's working in free contractual cooperation with the corporations that want union workers because the union workers are well trained and skilled and they've gone through the apprenticeship and then journeyman programs. So then that would be an incentive for them to bring in more people to work at these levels, trainees as well as experienced electricians. But the way modern unions work is that rather than operating in the free market, they use their, I would call, sinister marriage with the coercive power of government to ensure that non-union members are locked out, that there's a scarcity, therefore, of the providers of that service, that it be electrical repair or laying wire or whatever it might be. And so wage rates are then artificially go up beyond, and this is more monopolistic practice, beyond the competitive price of the wages. And then, of course, when that occurs, people are left without one, the service, and then two, the expense is beyond the market price, the competitive price that would have otherwise been reached if indeed the demand was met in a natural way. So he says the prevailing labor union policies are restrictive and not monopoly price policies per se. The unions are intent upon restricting the supply of labor in their field without bothering about the fate of those excluded. He goes on. He says, on the domestic market, the unions do not tolerate the competition of non-unionized workers. And if you speak to anyone in a modern union, you know that that's indeed the case. The antagonism and enmity for scabs or non-union labor is quite palpable. And then he says, uh, they admit, I'm sorry, and they admit only a restricted number of union membership. Those not admitted must go into less remunerative jobs or must remain unemployed. The unions are not interested in the fate of these people. That's true. Rarely do you hear unions talk about the fate of the non-unionized, even if those people are attempting to get into the union.
Mm-hmm.
And here he goes further. He says this, even if the union takes over the responsibility for its unemployed members and pays them out of the contributions of its employed members, unemployment doles not do not lower not low I'm sorry, unemployment doles not lower than the earnings of the employed members, its action is not a monopoly price policy. For the unemployed union members are not the only people wronged by the union's policy of substituting higher rates for the potential lower market rates. Here's the kicker. The interest of those excluded from membership are never taken into account, nor is the consumer.
Right.
That's the huge part. And you'll never hear a union electrician who is almost univocally concerned with the rights of fellow union members and his own pocketbook, trying to artificially inflate the services that he's providing beyond the market and competitive rates that would otherwise be had. Talk or be concerned about the actual customer, the actual consumer, the actual business. It's always this antagonistic relationship. Oh, I shouldn't say always, but almost always this extraordinarily antagonistic relationship, as the video for we saw this week shows, even if the corporation is Alphabet. So we could take a look at that now, right?
So to be supported by the city of Austin and also our allies in the labor community, give us the motivation to keep this fight
Not to
going.
interrupt, but they just laid us all off.
Oh,
Yeah, they just laid us all off.
I guess we just all
Our
got
jobs are ended today, effective immediately.
Wow.
I'm sorry your time's expired, but we'll follow up on this. Thank you.
And Alphabet, the parent company for Google, and just pretty hilarious that this guy in the middle of was in Austin. I think it was in Austin,
Austin, Texas.
and I don't know how many times you're gonna be able to see that in your life, of at the public hall meeting, you get fired as you're speaking. The odds of that happening are so slim. Think about all the places you can get laid off. To be in a public hall meeting and then to be the one speaking, that guy's gonna have that forever.
Talk about just serendipity. That is the epitome of it right there.
And I know it was just a viral video from this week, but I don't even know what workers union would be for Alphabet. I don't even know. I don't see
I don't
any.
know. Computer Internet Coders Union of Greater Austin.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like they're
And who would they glom onto as the bigger union? Would that be SEIU? Would it be IBW? They're working with electronics. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know why what the fuss is about, I guess.
But the look on the guy's face when the girl comes up and says, "Yeah, we've all been laid off." It's just priceless.
I wonder, because someone had to do the laying off. I wonder if it was like, if you show up to that meeting, you're laid off. Like, I wonder if that was known beforehand or
Oh,
not.
I don't. Yeah, I would suspect that Google's smarter than to do that.
It kind of had a little bit of who's the guy that whispered to W on 9/11?
Oh yeah, what was his name? I could see his face. Was it Paul something? It was not. It wasn't Wolfowitz. It was.
A second planes hit the tower or whatever. That guy.
Yeah, yeah, that guy.
Did that guy do anything else besides whisper in George W. Bush's ear on 9/11?
Yeah, he was the chief of staff, I believe.
Oh, really?
No, yeah, it's not Casey. Maybe it was the Casey. I can't remember.
I'm
I can see
looking it
his
up.
face. Yeah. Any other questions about unions? I used to get in arguments with. Well, I
So
still get in
okay, so
arguments with everyone about
we
these.
on the segue you brought up, we were talking about racism, and that was kind
Oh,
of your segue. Can you give
yes.
some examples of that?
Well, the unions, even to this day in major metropolitan areas, are noted in numerous studies. I can't cite one at the moment because you could just Google it, so long as that alphabet worker is not holding the code for that. But yeah, you could just look up, and they have a history of exclusion by race. And that's why, for example, I had mentioned earlier in the episode A. Philip Randolph. He was attempting as a African American labor union leader, trying he efforted for most of his life to try to get recognition for a variety of or numerous black people and different trades into white labor unions, and they were just absolutely, so he just formed his own. So they had to go the autonomous route. So yeah, there you could look at, and furthermore, these unions, well, the problem that unions have run into, especially and Mises talks about this too, given that they're by their nature and in a sense self covenant agreement with their members, exclusionary of other members or non-union members that might even attempt to get in. they have they've historically had an extraordinary, excuse me, nativist tinge to them. So this goes back to even the most recent history in 1980s and 90s, where any time that a politician ranging from Ronald Reagan to anyone of prominence, even Cesar Chavez or something like that in the social order, um, would talk about open immigration. Unions are extraordinarily, whether it's upfront when it's advantageous for them to do, or behind the scenes, they are extraordinarily antagonistic toward immigration because, again, this would threaten their grip on the labor market.
It was Andy Card.
Oh,
You
wait,
know,
that was Andy Card. It wasn't Casey, it was Andy Card. That's right. Was Andy Card in a union? The Union of Murderous Neocons. Well, that's a powerful union for sure. They're all over the place.
with unions, you're mentioning arguments you get into. Is this more with liberals or conservatives? Because I feel like this is one of those where you could be opposing both sides. Like there's not that many issues that you kind of know when an issue comes up which side's going to be which. But I think with unions, you don't really know Democrat, Republican.
Yeah, well, a lot of it is with liberals because they believe that even the supposed left anarchists who like the dissolution of government but keep around the Department of Labor and all these regulatory agencies to ensure the safety of the worker. So, I mean, what was the question? I forgot what the question was.
Who do you see yourself
Oh,
arguing
yes,
with more?
who would I argue with? Yeah. Well, leftists mostly because they believe that there's this natural antagonism between labor and capital, and that's just pure Marxist uh, thought that there's this historical proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. By the way, Gene Epstein is great on this when he debated who's that Rutgers professor who Dave Smith always had on, Ben Burgess, who's just a lunkhead and kind of just a lefty. But he said, Ben, in capitalism, in truly laissez-faire markets, you would have, and you could have workers' cooperatives. You could have something like, who are the brewers of, say, a Spotted Cow?
New Glarus?
Yeah, New Glarus. You know, New Glarus is employee owned,
Yeah.
right? So you could have employee owned. That is to say, the employees own the means of production. They own the factory. They own the brewery. They have a shared cooperative, and they can produce goods. Now, one would say, well, if that's the case under capitalism, Gene Epstein, why is it that there are so few worker owned companies and enterprises? And he said, well, that's not as a result of capitalism interfering. That's a result of the fact that workers, if you're actually good at brewing, you don't want to necessarily get into, nor might you have the skills to do management, right? So a person who's a skilled brewer and has the opportunity to work for a brew company, by the way, not taking on any of the risk of ownership.
Yeah. And you might not even want to. Yeah. You probably
You don't
don't
want to
want
deal.
to.
You don't want to deal with the hassle of that. Do you really want to go into meetings with tax accountants and figure out how to engage in the loopholes in the 76,000 page federal tax code? Hell no. You want to brew beer. That's what's so liberating about the hierarchy of the labor market and the diversification of the labor market. And when you have the diversification of labor and the division of labor being so extraordinarily intricate, well, then people can pursue their own productive capacities according to their talents and desires. And remember, time, this is a great insight of the Austrian economists too. Time is the most scarce resource. You know, the way in which, or what I choose to devote my productive hours to and how to maximize that, one has to be a determination of my own in freedom, or else we're just that's the definition of a slave if you don't have that,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't have the means by which to determine that, I'd rather spend my time brewing beer and drinking it, frankly, than going off to some meeting to determine if this underwriting syndicate is going to give us 4% offer on building a new and trying to negotiate with this town's village manager so he could give me a I don't know, double barrel bond or something. I'm like, what? I don't want to do any of that. Not only is it tedious, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'd rather brew beer.
Right.
So I remember, can I tell another anecdotal story that is just from my own experience? I might have shared this with you before, but
I think you've said this, but go ahead.
okay, so when I was working in the moving industry, do you hear the story? Is
Yeah.
this the one you were talking about? Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm working in the moving industry, and my father, who worked in the moving industry for 45 years, said, "Look, there's this opportunity. Why don't you get licensed and bonded, and get a truck, and we'll make you a subcontractor, and you go do all the pack jobs." Which is packing up people's material boxes and making sure their glassware is saved, wrapping some of their furniture, what have you, right? Because that would be lucrative. It's an opportunity. And I looked into it. It is a great idea, and it would have been lucrative. But my God, the time and trying to recruit people to do it, and then like scheduling this and getting work orders together, it was like, fuck this. I'm just going to go work for the company because the company's doing all of that. All I have to do is show up on time. They give me a work order that I go do the packing. I get paid for that. And then I go home. Yes. Is there overhead because I, myself as the proletariat are giving to capital? But there's no antagonism there. It's a cooperative relationship. And by the way, it was by far the preferred thing because it would have taken me a year of having no money and even putting money of my own money or diverting funds into that enterprise before I even saw a dime. Why do that?
Yeah.
You know? And that's where Ben Powell's book on socialism sucks and his own work is so great. You know, when he went down to Guatemala and even though they're working in what we would as Westerners perceive as a sweatshop, and he goes and interviews the Guatemalans and he says, would you prefer having less pay and more kind of representation in what goes on in the company and more of a say in the company, and more benefits? Or would you just like to keep your pay as it is, without having that say so? And the results were overwhelming. It was over 95% of the workers said, no benefits. I don't want any say in the company. I don't want anything like this. I just want to work and then take home whatever pay I can get, what I deem as fair remuneration and compensation based on what they would otherwise be doing or what otherwise would be available to them. That's the other thing. You look at the situations in developing countries and everyone says, oh, how horrible is it that Bangladeshis at a young age are working in textile mills? Well, you know what the alternative is? Forcing them out of those factories, and as the UN did in the 1990s, forcing them into schools. But because their families are so poor, they just leave the schools and then they go off into prostitution. That's what happened as a result of the government program when all of that meddling takes place.
Yeah. You ready to get to a town that,
Very pro-union,
yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of something more clever, but
even
yeah,
though they never deigned to actually do the type of labor that union laborers do. But go ahead.
this is Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Village to consider Ridgeland Avenue bike lane. A feasible study, if approved, will cost $86,000, $86,309.
Oh God.
How do you get into the business of doing these studies for these villages? Because
It's such a racket, Charlie. It's such a racket.
do you have to sell your soul to do the village study? Because these village study numbers are absurd. And I assume it's just doing research and presenting a PowerPoint at the end of it. And it seems like the best business ever. Outside of maybe modern universities, which are the best business ever, I would say.
Yeah, no accountability. No, government's the best business ever.
I
No
think I think
accountability.
I think universities are better.
Well, those are just arms of the government, so I see your point. I
Yeah.
concede your point.
Oak Park's Village Board is considering a new bike lane on Ridgeland Avenue, but residents disagree whether it will be an improvement or a detriment. Residents have said, all right, sorry, can we talk about, I just want to hammer the university point case down because I was thinking about some things. Imagine, imagine being a business where you can put people into tens of thousands of dollars in debt and people still cheer for your sports team. Like hardcore.
Not only cheer for your sports teams, but they have nothing to show for it. In other words, there's no accountability. There's no way you could go back. Try to, Google rate Harvard or try to Google rate the University of Arkansas or DePaul. Like there's no ratings you put down. You don't just say, "Oh, by the way, my useless psychology degree, I'm now a Starbucks barista," as the cliche goes, or
That is
right?
the that is the cliche.
Where,
So
but whereas if you bought an item of clothing from Walmart and you were able to show it's defective, they'll give you a refund. No such thing.
so this is a video that The Onion made 11 years ago when The Onion was semi-funny.
Yeah, oh God, has it? It's gone the way of all the late night people.
Man,
It's gotten kimmeled.
it's a pretty fun. It was pretty funny. Man has alarming level of pride in institution that left him in debt.
There
So
you
I
go.
kind of that's where I got the. I think that's where I got the. Was probably think about it. Man has alarming level of pride in institution that left him in debt, unprepared for job market. It's a pretty funny video. And then all the comments are like, "This ain't satire. This is, you know."
Reality.
Anyways,
Mhm.
let's get back to Oak Park. A bike lane. Residents have said they feel unsafe walking, cycling, and driving on certain streets in Oak Park, and the bike lane and other traffic items are intended to meet those transportation needs. Several residents gave public comments at the board's March 5th meeting, and their opinions were split. Some pointed out potential new problems that could arise, such as delivery drivers parking in the bike lane, loss of parking, and kids' safety while crossing. Quote, "It's a disaster in the making," Mary Pickle said. "I do not think the positives of this project outweigh the unintended consequences." Why do we always say unintended consequences?
Yeah. Well, they can't.
Why
Just
is it always why do we just consider what we it used to just be called being dumb and having no foresight and not being able to see into the future. Now we just look back on everything and we call it unintended consequences. People do that with
because
history
that's
all people do that with history all of the time.
well, sure, and they do it in economics too, negative externalities, but you don't even have to do that. It's just the excuse making for when a government program that the market would otherwise provide if there was a need, just
The
crumbles to the ground.
the
It's just
justification for inefficiency and being dumb is
yeah, it was unintended consequences. Who could have thought? Despite our $87,000 feasibility study, we couldn't figure it out.
Others disagreed. One commenter said a protected bike lane on Ridgeland would be a quote godsend. Another, Jack Davidson, said he's had quote countless near misses while biking and running and once was hit and had to have surgery. Traffic violations and deaths are not random accidents, Davidson said, but they're tragedies that you are responsible to prevent.
Huh? Again, the god of government. They worship the state. You are fallible if you don't take away the injustice.
But what if
And
it just
I can,
saves but what if it just saves one life?
well, yeah, yeah, sure. And then right, that's the modern worship of the state.
From 2018 to 2022, there were 132 traffic deaths and serious injuries in Oak Park. According to a presentation by Alex Hansen from Sam Schwartz Engineering, traffic deaths and serious injuries are 12 times more likely for people biking compared to those in cars and 15 times more likely for people walking. More than 80% of Oak Parkers reported they've experienced or witnessed a traffic crash. Additionally, people of color experience significantly more deaths as a result of traffic crashes in Oak Park.
Wait, whoa, now see how they're blurring the lines? It's traffic crashes. It's not bike related traffic crashes.
And then also it's not only that, but more than 80% of Oak Parkers reported they've experienced or witnessed a traffic crash. What does that even mean? Like if you drive by the scene of an accident, does that
That's it. Who are the 13, was it 87 you said?
80% of Oak
Okay,
Parkers
who are the
reported they've
20 people who
experienced?
haven't witnessed a traffic accident? Are they still are they still quarantined from COVID?
Yeah, I mean, traffic deaths and serious injuries are 12 times more likely for people biking compared to those in cars. Wouldn't that be like
Okay. Again,
wouldn't
this
that be a good reason to not make a bike lane?
well, or just outlaw biking. That's it. Just outlaw biking. You'd have no biking traffic deaths. See, this is the whole thing, right? If you just outlaw biking, there would be zero, right?
And 15 times more likely for people walking?
See, these are so ridiculous. These, I mean, what are they using? What are the qualifications? Does it mean the percentage of people who are walking? What's the number comped to people driving? I mean, what's a serious accident? Correct. This smacks of like the school shooting thing, where a janitor commits suicide in a school parking lot at 9 o'clock at night when there's no students, and that's counted as a school shooting or school violence.
Yeah.
Or the other one, a big, big one was in the 1980s. We were bombarded with messages of how many kids were going to bed hungry. And basically and you can look this up. The institutions that were doing the investigations admitted later they just made up the numbers. They would have meetings because they had no idea how to calculate it, but they were concerned about it. So they just made up the numbers. So the meetings were not about the like data analysis or investigations and studies in the aggregate. No, no, no. They were having meetings to determine, well, if we say that 1 in 3 are go to bed hungry, that's a little too much. And 1 in 5, no, yeah, that we'll beta test 1 in 5 with groups and see how they react. And that's how they came up with the numbers. It's just all bullshit.
I think this is made up. Now that you say that,
yeah.
the number's 12, 15, and then they use more than 80%. Is it 81?
Yeah, right.
89?
Yeah.
Okay, back to it.
Is it 100?
Additionally, people of color experience significantly more deaths as a result of traffic crashes in Oak Park. Conducting a feasibility study for a new bike lane on Ridgeland comes with the price tag of $86,309. The fiscal year 2024 budget for the village has $50,000 allocated for the study, but the board would need to transfer an additional $36,309 from its fund balance for the work. Village staff has some of the same concerns as residents, including loss of parking, loss of space for garbage collection, loss of school drop-off and pickup areas, and loss of areas for delivery vehicles. Losing parking lanes could result in cars blocking the bike lane or traffic lane, according to the village. Another thing is it's cold for a third of the year. Like it's freezing.
Right. People are still out there biking. And the other thing is Oak Park, for those of you who are from around here, Oak Park is famous for not plowing the streets. So are these bike lanes going to be plowed?
Oh, that's actually, yeah. I would maybe if it makes the snow plows come out.
Yeah, maybe this is the incentive they need, right?
The majority of the board expressed interest in moving forward with the feasibility study, but several members wanted to consider other options for a bike lane as well. Quote, we really need to prioritize folks who are biking and walking and their safety over getting people to their destination 15 seconds, 30 seconds faster. Trustee Brian Straw said.
Notice
How-
that it's the
How
government
fast is
getting them there.
Brian's straw biking?
Man, he's working up a sweat.
It's only 15 seconds longer for this guy.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying, no, notice the language here. It's like we can control how fast people are going to their appointments. Or
Mm.
we have the capacity to do so. The megalomania of a state agent is just, it knows no bounds. Even if it's in the insane asylum we know is Oak Park and relatively small.
We gotta make like a WWE entrance music for Ravi.
Oh boy, yeah. Now I'll get that going. I'll
Just like or just like a chant, Ravi, Ravi,
Robbie,
something like that.
just like the Undertaker music.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dun,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
dun.
Trustees Susan Buchanan and Corey Wesley also said they want to prioritize people over vehicles, but trustee Ravi Parakat pointed out that car congestion could be a problem for emergency vehicles. Quote, I feel really strongly that we should make commitment to making this happen, Buchanan said. Quote, it is a joy to ride those protected bike lanes.
It's a joy. Well, again, subjective. Again, yeah, no consideration of others value how they value things.
Village staff is negotiating a contract with Trans Systems Corporation for this study.
Well, you know how they got picked. Oh, it's a trans company.
If the study is, it actually is Tran Systems, but I
Okay,
just,
thank you for ruining my
yeah,
joke.
sorry. If the study is approved, final recommendations would likely come before the board in fall 2024, said Bill McKenna, village engineer. The public will be able to give input on the bike plan at transportation and plan commission meetings about the work and through the Engage Oak Park website. That paragraph's boring.
You know, they're going to have
Boring.
debates over the width and what color to use. And,
What,
oh, that bike figure is not. It looks too masculine.
what are we gonna paint it in June?
Yes, there's going to have to be rainbow bike lanes. What about separate bike lanes for the trans community?
The 2024 fiscal year budget also has 300 grand allocated for construction of neighborhood greenways. This budget includes 350 grand to design the remaining greenway system, construction for which is expected in 2025 and 2026. Village staff plan to apply for 250 grand from the Cook County Invest in Cook grant to help fund construction.
I'm so happy that you and I will be contributing to the beautification of Oak Park.
Man, if those boys from the 1770s could see us now.
Yeah. Yeah. The visage of disappointment would be all over.
I feel so bad, even though it's not.
It was
Do-
over in 1945, as we say in the book.
I'm doing
So
my best.
we're-
I've been doing
we're
my
lea-
best to bring
we're
it back.
living in we're living in the ruins of a once great idea,
Yeah.
a once
Okay.
great proposition, not as a nation, but a once great proposition of a political and social system.
Next and last one. Grace Episcopal Church to close migrant shelter March 15th.
Racist.
Subtitle: The church does not have the necessary funds to continue operations. Who could have seen the unintended consequences
Oh
of
my gosh.
the unintended consequences of paying for people to live here that we can't
Yes.
afford?
Especially a church that can't afford to actually be a church, can't do all the migrant labor stuff, migrant housing.
The Grace Episcopal Church is ending its migrant shelter program March 15th, but no one knows where the men staying there will go. At the February 13th village board meeting, Linda Francis, a member of Grace's Asylum Task Force, gave a public comment in which she expressed concerns about the village's support provided for Black and brown men at Grace. This responsibility at Grace has fallen largely on our pastor and has stretched our limit as a congregation. Francis said at the meeting, we at Grace initially felt abandoned. Women and families had been prioritized in the migrant response efforts, she said, over the men. But many of those men have families who just may not be with them at this time, Francis said. Trustee Corey Wesley said he was sensitive to the points Francis made about families being separated, particularly black men. Quote, it's
Wait.
the
Why? They throw the black men in there.
I think he's black. So I think he was saying,
Oh, okay.
quote, it's the inequity of the response that always gets me in this situation, he said. There is always someone being left out. In an email, Wesley said the government should not, quote, create programs that create inequity.
That's a tough one. Good luck on that one.
That's kind of like all they do.
Yes, that is their modus operandi. I mean,
Other
by their
board
very nature,
members, including trustee Brian Straw and village president Vicky Skaman,
oh,
echoed their desire for the men at Grace to be supported in resettlement. The men at Grace have been part of the village's program since the beginning, according to Lisa Shelley, deputy village manager, but each site operates differently. At the February 13th board meeting, Shelley suggested the village allocate a specific portion of funding for migrants at Grace. Reverend John Rumpel at Grace said the village originally asked the church to be an emergency shelter for migrants at the end of October, but that emergency aid was extended into a full-blown shelter, Rumpel said, with less resources than the other temporary shelters. Quote, these men
why
have
does
been,
a full-blown shelter have less
I,
resources than
I
a
think
temporary?
it's just saying that it was only used to put a roof over their head as opposed
Oh.
to providing them with other.
Services and
Yeah.
okay.
They weren't at the Carlton.
Yeah. And they didn't have a major theater or a bowling alley for entertainment or something like that.
Quote, these men have been at the bottom of totem pole in terms of services, he said.
That's racist.
How?
Oh, the totem pole. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Grace only has village funding for food and resources
Does
available
the
until
pastor go does the pastor go in there and go, "Oh, we smoke a peace pipe
yeah,
here.
right.
You part Indian." Or, "Hey, let's have slave auction like your ancestors." I mean, like, what is that? That's totally racist. Terrible. What a terrible pastor. Just awful.
I don't even there's a lot here. The church is housing 25 men as of Leap Day, Rumpel said, about 13 of which are from the village's original group. Many of the men have been split from their families, he said, echoing Francis's public comment. They were sent here by their families, commissioned really, to try to create a better future, Rumpel said. I've seen them getting jobs, and they just send that money immediately back to their wives and children. They're burdened by what is going on back home.
Yeah. Yeah, with that's a terrible situation for them.
Yeah. Especially being stuck in Oak Park. Like that's
Yeah, that's the worst part.
Like, why wouldn't you just go to Pilsen?
Yeah, exactly. At least there's some culture there.
Yeah.
But
That's probably where I would go
yeah,
if I was.
just if you were just a migrant,
Yeah.
you go to Pilsen. Yeah, that's good. That's cool.
Quote, if we do have men here who haven't found a place to stay, then they're going to have to be taken downtown to a landing platform and just basically start again, he said. What's a landing platform?
I have no idea. Just an area that designated for
It's
when
just a
they unload the bus.
gulag. We just got a
Yeah,
gulag.
yeah.
cell?
The landing platform is. Solzhenitsyn would say that's a gulag. I don't understand.
Yeah. The church has also been working to provide access to health clinics and case workers to provide meals and showers and to help migrants establish temporary protected status or asylum, Rumpel said. Quote, I feel really proud of the congregation's compassion and their display of wanting to help these men, he said. We've been grateful for response of this community. But the men staying at Grace are stressed about not having a concrete plan, Rumpel said in a follow-up email, and he does not want to see them end up on the streets. He's encouraged members of the parish to consider housing them, he said.
Yeah, good for them.
End of,
And
end of the article.
well, here comes in, and I'm glad you brought this up because it's a nice segue I wanted to bring up. The new magazine of the Mises Institute has gone from the title of the Austrian to the Misesian, and Ryan McMakin is the new editor, and his first issue is about Guido Holzmann, the great libertarian and Austrian economist, by the way, faithful traditional Catholic too, at the University of Angers in France. He's written a new book about the importance of and the economic reality of true generosity, and it's entitled is Abundance, Generosity, in the State, and how the moral hazard that the state creates is when it has ostensibly, although not effective, philanthropic arms or agencies. Well, then people defer because of their high taxation rates and the punitive fees that we're all paying. They turn to the government and say, well, what is the government doing if I'm giving over this money? Rather than as an immigration system more of the Hoppian fashion would be, look, all of this could have been avoided if the churches were prepared so as to sponsor these men and then be responsible for their attainment of a green card or work visa or what have you. All of this could have been done in the most peaceful and voluntaristic way. And instead, it's done in the most illicit and immoral way because, again, the state's trying to manage what it can't manage and refuses to relinquish the role of what would otherwise be private philanthropic institutions to do this and do this effectively. So I have a heightened level of sympathy for the migrants who are, just to simply attempting to work here, but again, and the men in Grace Episcopal, but really, again, you could point to the state as being the foundation of the problem, the genesis of the problem.
As they always are.
As they always are. It's endemic to our life. If only we could just get rid of it and all that is coercive.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Go support our sponsors. Our sponsor, Trident Team Beer.
Singular. So I'll be going on there and buying some merch soon. I gotta get another glass.
I got to get a glass.
Oh, they're just beautiful. Absolutely
And
beautiful.
I need to get some beers.
Yeah. And people can buy me a beer via
I might have to tell Trevor I need a re-up.
Oh, absolutely.
I need a refill.
I'm
Absolutely.
telling him I don't want any more beer from him unless it's from a commercial store.
Absolutely slam that Sixer.
Yeah.
Sixer didn't last long in the
Nope,
fridge.
it did not. It's long gone.
Gave one to a buddy too.
Yeah. What were the
Yeah.
thoughts? What were the feedback? What was the feedback? Excellent. Yeah. Well, it's just an excellent product.
It was I forgot which one. I think it was the Our Lady of Carmel.
Yeah. Excellent. The brown ale.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Awesome. So, well, look forward to next episode. And I have to go look at the reactions to our brilliant Demosthenes of a president giving his State of the Union address.
Yeah. I don't even know if I'm gonna tap in at all to that.
Nah, I want to hear the those type of moments. I
Yeah.
literally listened to it for 10 seconds in the car, and he said jab instead of job like 4 times when he meant job. So he
Is this gonna be the rug pull where it's just
I wonder. That's what I was thinking about, if he just
like they just set him out there to fail?
yeah.
The teleprompter's saying different things.
I wonder if there, that's a good question. I wonder if there's a sort of war among those who
I bet
like the
there
Buddha
is.
gigs and the people who are ensconced
There's
there.
got to be.
Yeah, and then people are like, you can't keep going like this. We can't keep marching the Manchurian Canyon.
That's actually a white pill.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely.
Is that ego, and not only ego, but also just
Chris?
difference in judgment,
Yeah,
just gets in the way.
sure. Sure. So, all right. Well, this is a good episode. Thanks for everybody for listening. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Yep. God bless. Peace.